Atomfall is an interesting game. It draws you in with its hauntingly atmospheric world, its mysterious characters, and a unique structure that encourages exploration. But for every moment of intrigue and discovery, there's an equal moment of frustration, whether it's the clunky combat, the inconvenient design choices, or the underwhelming payoff at the end. Today, we're taking a deep dive into why Atomfall is a mixed bag. Before we begin, if you do end up enjoying the video, then please consider subscribing, as we are trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But enough of that nonsense, let's begin with the world. As you can perhaps tell from my voice, I am English. More specifically, I am from the north of England, away from the cesspool known formerly as London. As such, I don't usually get to play many games that take place where I live, as every time a game developer decides to use England as a setting, they always gravitate towards London. As such, I am incredibly familiar with the inspiration for Atomfall's world, and I do think this world is one of the game's biggest strengths. From the moment you step into the game, there is a deep sense of unease. You're not just walking through a post-apocalyptic wasteland, you're navigating a place that is still alive, yet broken. The game is set in an alternate version of northern England that has suffered a disaster, and the way that disaster has shaped the world is immediately apparent. Everywhere you'll go, you will find evidence of a world that's trying to keep going but ultimately struggling. It makes even the most mundane locations feel unsettling. The game almost never relies on traditional horror tricks like jump scares, but rather on ongoing tension. It really excels in small everyday details that make the world feel disturbingly authentic. One aspect of this is the sound design. In most post-apocalyptic games, silence is the dominant atmosphere, and whilst Atomfall utilises this general philosophy, with there being almost no music in the game at all, hell there might actually be zero music at all, it's the unpredictable noises of the world that get to you. A radio crackling back to life for a brief moment, a distant sound somewhere in the woods, it all works to keep you a little bit on edge, making you question if you're really alone. I'm not going to pretend that the game is a horror game that's really scary, because it's neither of those things, but it can be quite uncomfortable in very specific circumstances. The amount of times I was trudging through the countryside and I would just stop and look around because I could swear I heard something was often enough to increase the tension. And of course there are the people here, or what's left of them. The survivors in Atomfall aren't your typical wasteland wanderers looking for food and shelter. They have food and shelter, but the people themselves, they're quite strange, they're detached, they're paranoid, or sometimes strangely calm given the circumstances. The people here also often feel like they're talking around you rather than to you. Even enemies you encounter out in the world won't necessarily just attack you simply for existing. A lot of the times they'll make a comment such as, "Let's not have any trouble," and just stare you down. Combat in this game can be very easily ignored, or at the very least limited to areas where you would be trespassing. In fact, you can even point your gun at an enemy and sometimes they will just put their hands up, but then when you turn around, they will put their hands down and start walking towards you. There's weird little behaviours like that I felt really elevated the game. A lot of the interactions with the NPCs feel more unnerving because you're never quite sure exactly what's going on. Are these people traumatized survivors? Are they hiding something? Is there something more sinister going on? You don't know, because a lot of Atomfall's storytelling happens through exploration. The game doesn't bombard you with cutscenes or exposition dumps, instead it lets you uncover the past on your own. Notes left behind tell stories of people trying to escape, of military cover-ups, of experiments that may have gone too far. It's the kind of storytelling that rewards your curiosity. The more you explore, the more pieces you put together, but the game never fully confirms anything, leaving you just enough ambiguity to make you second guess your conclusions. This sense of mystery is one of Atomfall's biggest strengths, until the end, but we'll get to that later. One of the most interesting aspects of Atomfall is how it structures its progression. Unlike many open world games that bombard you with quest markers and objectives, Atomfall takes a different approach. It drops you into its world and expects you to just figure things out. There's no neatly organised quest log or a big glowing arrow pointing to where you need to go next. Instead, the game encourages you to explore, to experiment, and uncover its mysteries at your own pace. There is a quest log, but it's not neatly organised. You can't just click on it and then get a new waypoint. That's not how it works. When an NPC gives you a quest, they will mark a location on your map. But when you get there, let's say you're looking for a key or something, that key is not highlighted. You need to go and find it yourself. From the very beginning, Atomfall presents you with a lot of choices in terms of how you want to progress. Do you head straight to the nearest settlement to get some supplies and talk to the locals? Do you veer off into the wilderness to go find something else? The game doesn't punish you for choosing the wrong path because there is no wrong path. Each direction leads to different encounters, different pieces of lore, and different dangers. One of the more rewarding parts of Atomfall is that not everything is placed in front of you. Some of the most interesting locations and story beats are just random places you would never go if you were simply completing quests. The structure of the game reminds me a lot of The Forgotten City, a very underrated game might I add, but Atomfall consists of a bunch of quest lines that seem separate at first, but over time converge within another. The Forgotten City did this and it worked perfectly. You complete quests for people, and during that quest you will learn something or you will gain an item that will help you progress further in another quest line you've been completing simultaneously. It's a similar approach here in Atomfall. There are various people that can give you quests, and whilst completing those quests you'll find plenty of other people giving out plenty more quests that seemingly can be linked together if you do them in a certain way. Rather than telling a linear story, Atomfall takes a more fragmented approach. You won't get a single clear explanation of what happened to the world, and you certainly won't find many trustworthy narrators. Instead, the game feeds you information in bits and pieces, through environmental details and old recordings and stuff, that often contradict each other, leading you not to know who's right, who you could trust. This structure works really well for the game's sense of mystery. You're never quite sure who to believe, and even when you think you've put together the full picture, there are a lot of gaps that make you second guess everything you're thinking has happened. It's the kind of storytelling that keeps you engaged because you have to do the work yourself to really figure things out. I do feel it's also worth mentioning that Atomfall is not a fast-paced game. This is not a game where you're constantly thrown into combat or bombarded with high-stakes action. You can play this game pretty normally and you might not face combat for over an hour. Instead, the game's pacing is deliberately slow. It encourages you to take your time and absorb the world. For some, this is a big strength. It makes the experience feel immersive, like you're truly surviving in a broken world. But for others, it might feel like the game drags at times, especially when backtracking or searching for that one item you need to progress and you just can't find it because there's no quest marker at all and you've explored every inch of the Sorry, we went a little bit overboard. Back to normality. This slow pace can be very frustrating though, when it feels like the game is intentionally wasting your time. Searching through dozens of drawers just to find a bandage, the lack of waypoints can make finding key items a real test of patience, as I just implied, and personally I find the lack of a fast travel a real problem. The world isn't too big and they want you to focus on exploration, so I understand why it's been omitted, but I fail to see how adding one fast travel location per region would have really dented that, because after a while the forced backtracking really does make the game feel padded rather than deliberately atmospheric. Does the structure work? That depends on what you're looking for. If you love open-ended exploration, uncovering a story piece by piece, and feeling like you are in control of your journey, then this approach is fantastic. It makes the world feel real, unpredictable, and full of secrets. But if you prefer a more guided experience, with clear objectives and a sense of steady progress, Atomfall can feel frustratingly vague and sometimes directionless. For all the atmosphere and mystery that Atomfall builds up, actually playing it can be an exercise in frustration. The game leans into survival mechanics, with a heavy emphasis on scavenging, managing resources, and dealing with unpredictable encounters. But while the idea of survival sounds tense and engaging, the actual gameplay mechanics often get in the way of that experience. Clunky combat makes Atomfall more difficult than it needs to be, not in a challenging but rewarding way, but in a "why is this so inconvenient" way. Let's start with the melee combat. In theory, it should be tense and strategic. Limited stamina, desperate swings, and well-timed attacks, making every fight feel like a struggle for survival. But in practice, it just feels bad. There's no real sense of impact when you hit enemies, and worse, there is no block button. Most survival games at least give you some way of mitigating damage, like a block or a parry, or even a dodge, but your only options here are to kick, which just doesn't feel good, or to try and land a hit before the enemy does. This turns every fight into a clunky mess where you're just hoping the enemy dies before you do. So what about the guns though? Atomfall does have guns, but do not expect smooth or responsive shooting. Aiming is sluggish, and there's a strange, almost delayed feeling to every shot you take. Some weapons feel overly stiff, while others feel floaty. There's no consistency, and it never quite feels satisfying to use any weapon in this game. Another big issue is the enemy AI. Sometimes they're smart, they take cover, they sneak, they flank, they react, but other times they just stand still for no reason, they get stuck on objects, and then out of nowhere, they will snap into action, and it makes them really difficult to read. It isn't a good unpredictability, it's just janky. The biggest missed opportunity though is undoubtedly the stealth. There are a massive amount of areas in this game that feel as though they were designed with stealth in mind, but it's only really a viable option in extremely specific circumstances. Enemies can see you from pretty much anywhere. Their detection radius is just far too high, and the detection meter also fills up instantly. But then on the flip side, you can crouch in the world's shortest grass, and then they're suddenly blind. The stealth system needed a hell of a lot more time in the oven. Even outside of the combat and the stealth, the game has some frustrating mechanics. Movement feels very sluggish, and simple traversal can be a headache. You'll come across small obstacles, a fallen log, a piece of debris, a slight incline in the road that looks like you should be able to step over, but instead you're forced to awkwardly go around. It's the kind of thing that really breaks immersion, because it doesn't feel natural. If it were real life, you would just climb over the thing, but in Atomfall, the game's mechanics simply won't let you. If Atomfall had more refined gameplay, I feel like it could have been truly special. The world, the story, the atmosphere, it's all there, but the moment-to-moment gameplay constantly pulls you out of the experience. There is a good game buried somewhere in here, but it feels like the developers prioritised world building over making sure the gameplay was actually fun to engage with, and that is a real shame, because when Atomfall works, it really works, but when it doesn't, it's hard to ignore the cracks. But the thing that annoys me the most about Atomfall is how abruptly it ends. There are multiple endings, but rather than providing meaningful resolutions, the majority of them feel like they just cut off rather than conclude. You spend hours exploring, piecing together information, trying to make sense of what's happening, only for the game to suddenly roll credits with very little payoff. The endings vary depending on the choices you make and who you side with, but they all share a frustrating quality. They hint at deeper revelations without actually delivering them. You might escape the quarantine zone, but you're left wondering what the larger conspiracy really was. You might choose to embrace the strange forces at play, but the game never fully explains what they are. You might align yourself with certain factions, only to realise that their true motivations are maddeningly vague. Instead of providing a satisfying conclusion, the game just stops. And look, an abrupt ending can absolutely work. I'm not saying that the Atomfall ending is bad because it's abrupt. It just doesn't work with the kind of mystery that they were setting up in this game, and it's really disappointing because not answering every single question isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some of the best horror and mystery media leave a lot of elements up to interpretation, but Atomfall doesn't just leave some ambiguity, it leaves almost everything unanswered. The nature of the disaster, the true purpose of the factions, the unexplained phenomena happening in the world, it all just feels like it's building towards something that never actually comes. Now, you can argue it's explained further in the notes, and look, I read the notes and that is true. You still don't get answers, you just get more of an idea. You also shouldn't have to read a bunch of random notes to piece together a story, but that's a discussion for another time. The game sets up all these intriguing story threads, but instead of tying them together, it just drops them. Another issue is how these endings are presented. They feel extremely rushed, as if the game simply runs out of time rather than reaching a natural stopping point. The game just shows a few still images and tells you what you did already. No detailed explanation, no real consequences, just a brief, often cryptic ending screen and then you're done. In the end, Atomfall's biggest issue isn't that its story is bad, it's that it never fully delivers on the compelling mysteries that it sets up. The world, the atmosphere, the lore, it all feels like it's building towards something bigger. But instead of a jaw-dropping revelation or a satisfying conclusion, I'm not saying we needed the answers, but we still should have had a better conclusion, the game just fizzles out. It doesn't feel like a deliberate, ambiguous ending, it feels unfinished. And when a game puts so much effort into making you care about its world, it's frustrating to be left with so little in the end. Despite all of this, I did enjoy a lot of my time with Atomfall. There is a good game here, and with a bit more time in the oven to refine the mechanics and actually end it properly, I think it could have been great. With all of that said, there is a type of player out there who will enjoy the things I didn't in Atomfall. I can absolutely see why somebody would fall in love with this thing. I think it will become a cult classic, and if after everything I've said you're sat there thinking, I actually think I would enjoy this game, then you're absolutely, probably, maybe, possibly correct. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you did enjoy it. Remember, we are trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and it looks like we're going to cut it a bit close. So if you did enjoy them, please consider leaving a like and a subscribe on the video, because it really does help. I upload at least one video a week, but for now, that is all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.